Hi everybody, good evening. Thank you very much, Jonathan. It's lovely to be back in Cavan and to see lots of familiar faces, and even my cousin has arrived as well for a bit of support. So it's really nice to be back. As Jonathan said, this evening I want to spend a wee while talking about land ownership in Cavan, but to begin by saying thank you to Jonathan and to the Library Service for the invitation to speak, and I hope that you'll enjoy maybe a little bit and take a little bit away from what I want to say. So what I want to spend a wee while doing during the lecture is to firstly say a little bit about the land question in Ireland. I think we all have a good sense about what the land question is, and to say a little bit about land reform, just very broadly. And then I want to focus in on Cavan itself and to paint a picture very quickly of land ownership in Cavan in the 19th century, so that we get a sense of who owns the land, how much land they have, and so on. And then very quickly, I'm going to trace through the Land Acts from 1869 down to around 1909, and then focus in a wee bit more on this 1923 Land Act and its impact on the domain at Farnham and the agency of the Irish Land Commission at Farnham just 100 years ago. So to say a little of the land question itself, in a sense, the land question, as you know, colonialism, plantations, confiscation of land, redistribution of land in the 16th century, 15th, 16th, 17th centuries results in a predominantly non-Indigenous, numerically small, very powerful elite that we commonly refer to as the landlords owning Ireland. Access to land, which of course was so significant in the country in terms of your getting on and your status without any sort of major industry in the country, was governed by the landlords. So if your access to land was governed by these landlords through various mechanisms, but primarily through the leasing of land. And these arrangements, they became embedded, they were part of the practice of land ownership and land occupation in Ireland. But of course, it's contentious. There are times throughout history, as Miles Dungan has covered in his book, Land is All That Matters, and if you haven't read that book, to spend a wee while looking through it, it's really a great overview of the land question within Ireland. Occasionally, the tensions rise up. There's agrarian violence in trying to attempt to question or to address the injustices of this landlord system. And really, from around 1870 onwards, the land question becomes very deeply intertwined with the national question about independence and so on as well. So this question of who owns the land, how it's accessed and so on, I suppose it is a backdrop really to Irish history as we go through. But that system is reformed, and it's reformed through a series of legislation. Very broadly speaking, other countries have experienced land reform as well as Ireland. So land reform, Russell King, back in a book published in 1977, defined it as being this more or less direct, publicly controlled change. So the state is in charge of this change in the existing character of land ownership. And it normally attempts a diffusion of wealth, income, or productive capacity. So that's what land reform is aiming to do. It's normally publicly controlled, the state's involved with it, the character of land, of who owns the land, is changed and altered, and it's about diffusing the wealth away from the hands of a few into the hands of a greater number of people. So this sense of land reform, the land question, if we can just bear that in mind as we go through. We are able to recreate who owns Ireland in the 1870s. As you know, lots of you will be familiar with this famous survey, The Return of Landowners in 1876, and you can recreate this landowning elite from this return. It's available online if you Google it. If you Google anything now, you'll find it. But if you Google Return of Landowners 1876, you'll get the listing for Cavan, and it's arranged out alphabetically. If you had 1 acre of land or more, your name will be in this, and your address and the value of the land and so on. And when you spend a wee while pulling that apart, you get a picture like this. So this is a breakdown of land ownership in Cavan from that government return in 1876. So I'm going to concentrate just on the people who own 500 acres of land or more. Landlords were generally defined as being people that had 500 acres of land, so that's the kind of the cut-off point. So I think if you add from 501 acres up to more than 20,000, I think there's about 166 individuals owning about 450,000 acres of land in Cavan. So it's that sense of the inequalities, the kind of I suppose I think it's an injustice that land and it's concentrated in the hands of so few starts to emerge there. So you have this elite, and this elite, these are the top ones in Cavan. Here they are. These ones are the premier landowners of Cavan. And I've looked here at classifying these guys by the value of their land rather than how much land they have, because the value, I think, is more important than the amount of land that you have, because that gives you your clout, your economic clout, your status, and so on. So you throw your eye down through this listing here. There are names that you will recognize. You will see that some of these people are resident, some of them are absentee, some of them are right outside the country, others in other parts of Ireland, and you get that sort of breakdown here. And very significantly, you can see there the fifth most valuable estate in Cavan in 1876 belonged to the Commissioners of Church Temporalities. So this is church owned land in the county. This map from Paddy Duffy's work gives us the geography of this, so you start to see where these estates are found within Cavan, and you'll be familiar with some of them. But you can see here very quickly, you can see the non-resident estates, so the estates that are in that this shading here. These are the non-resident estates. So you can see there's quite significant chunks of the county where we have non-resident owners, and then you have other owners that are named, like Farnham, who we all know, the Youngs at Ballyborough, the Coots at Coot Hill, and so on. So we have absentee, resident, we have large estates, small estates, we have those that are fragmented, like the Annesley estate, and the Annesley lands are up here. They're spread throughout the county. The same with the Saunderson lands, spread throughout the county. And then consolidated estates or compact estates like these ones here. And all of these ones over here where you have that compact nature to them, these are all estates that were established during the Ulster plantation. And then valuable estates and those that are less valuable. And of course, that is of course very much connected with land quality and so on. So one of the first acts to kind of deal with land ownership is the act which disestablishes the Church of Ireland. And it didn't set out to be the first land act to deal with land and so on. It was of course set out and is to separate the church and state in 1869, to separate these two entities. But it had to deal with the land and the property that the Church of Ireland owned. And the Church of Ireland had vast tracts of land. We see in Cavan alone, they have over 6,000 acres of land. So all of the land that the church owns is transferred to these guys, the Commissioners of Church Temporalities. They then see the transfer of that land over to back to the church, some of it back to the representative church body, or on to new owners. Now, if you were a tenant of the church-owned lands, the commissioners would advance you 3/4 of the purchase price. So that meant that you needed to have the other quarter saved up yourself. You needed to have that as a kind of a deposit, and you'd repay that over 30 odd years. In certain instances, tenants who didn't have the money to purchase, they could get somebody else to buy the land for them. So you have, I'm just pulling out one extract here from the Diocese of Kilmore, and here we have the first time, and the significance of this is that this is the first time that tenant farmers are actually becoming the owners of their own land. So we have never had this happening before in Ireland up until this point in time. And it's in a way a kind of a side bar to the bigger dimension of the Disestablishment of the Church Act. So it's hard to beat talking about home, so I decided I would give you a little sense as to what's found here. But basically you have the name of the purchasers, the people who buy the land, where the land is, and this is our own home area here, the Parsi here. I think this is my ancestor, this fella called Bell, and how much land he's buying, when it's been purchased, and the size of his farm, and so on, all of that. So this is a hugely significant document. I just put in another little extract near the bottom here, where this is for Dromina, so this is from Kilother, and this is and these tenants here, a lot of these tenants, these guys are getting other people to purchase the land for them, a lot of these guys. But you also have the clergyman who's there at the time buying some of the land as well. So he buys some of the land because if the tenants didn't want to buy it, the other people, it could be sold then on to other parties as well. So that's a very significant impact from this act. And you start to see in 1877, it starts to tell us a little bit about what's significant about it. The last line here is probably the most important. The beneficial results of the measures adopted in the Church Act for creating a class of small proprietors can already be so plainly observed. So this gives us a very good context for what's to come on after this. And that commission that's set up, the Commissioners of Church Temporalities, they ultimately become in 1881 the Irish Land Commission. Those people, the offices that they have on Merrion Street in Dublin, the whole framework that they have used for moving the land between landlord or the church and the tenants here is the same one that they use. The first Land Act, though, that we might have in our mind from school history is probably this one in 1870, the famous Bright Clause within it. The impact in Cavan is that this Gosford estate at Arva, we see at least 42 farms at Gosford being sold at that point in time. And again, the government, through the Office of Public Works, is advancing a certain amount of money, tenants are buying. But it's a very, very small number of people. As I said, in 1881, the Land Commission is established, and this is really significant because it sets out two things. One, I suppose, to set fair rents, and this is the first time that the landlord's kind of power over land is really curtailed. Now an official body can step in and say, no, that rent is too high, you must have it at this level. And they're also there then to be the vehicle for transferring ownership of land as well. In 1885, there is another Land Act, again in Cavan, relatively small acreage is sold. and most of the people who are selling out are non-resident, relatively small estates, and guys who have come to the property market like Vernon in Belturbet just in the mid-19th century. So he's just moving his land on that he has acquired relatively recently. In 1891, there's another Land Act. This is significant because we see a greater level of sales of estates happening. And again, you'll recognise some of these names. Those with the little asterisks beside them only sell part of their estate at this time. Others, like the Clements family at Rathkenny, sell their entire tenanted estate, and the Finleys and the O'Reilly estate down at from the O'Reillys of Oldcastle, their estate around Den and Kilbride. There's more legislation, so this is where this protracted nature comes from it. 1903. 1903 is probably significant because the landlord gets a bonus. There's a cash bonus. The tenants have much longer to pay, and the repayment rates are good. So you can leave, these are intergenerational loans, they're over 68 years, so there's lots of payments within it. So these are just some of the families who are selling out at this stage. I suppose what's significant and what you have to think about this is that you need your tenants to be wanting, they need to be willing and able to purchase, and then you also have your landlords who are also willing to sell as well. For landlords who were in debt, selling land was a great way to get out of it, but for other families that weren't in debt, where the estate was solvent, there was no big push to sell the land. So you have people, as we'll see, hanging on for quite some time. And the extraordinary resource that's available to allow us to recreate all of this transfer of land are these parliamentary papers, these return of advances. And I think these are a sort of a seriously under-tapped sort of a resource. You have, when you locate them, it does take a little bit of work locating them, but you have, when you find them, a record of each tenant who purchases land across Ireland. So it's a tremendous genealogical record, it's a tremendous social record of this revolution that's happening as people become owners of land in their own right. So you can see down to very small, 12 acres, 5 acres, 3 acres, the name of the person who's buying it, how much they're paying for it. All of this for the entire country is available in these parliamentary papers. So, to give us a little overview, between 1881 and 1909, this legislation that we've talked about results in about 65% of Cavan's landmass being transferred from landlord to tenant. About 14,500 holdings or farms is there. So this revolution is underway, but it's piecemeal, it's gradual, it's not something that happens very, very quickly, as we've seen. In 1923, there is a piece of legislation passed, and it's one of the first pieces of legislation that's passed by a native Irish government that seeks to end landlordism, to resolve the land question. As we see, all of these previous pieces of legislation from 1869 down to the 1920s, it has moved the process on. It's moved it on quite significantly. But in newly independent Ireland, there are still 114,000 farms or holdings on about 3.5 million acres of land that remain in the hands of the landlords in 1923. So this act is passed in 1923. It is seen as being sort of evolutionary in its nature rather than being revolutionary. Joseph Sheehan has written about this. But the significance of the 1923 Land Act is the expanded powers that's given to the Land Commission. So the Land Commission from the 1880s and then from 1896 onwards had greater power to acquire land. And that power that they had is expressed in this section of the Land Act. So as you can see there, wherever the Land Commission see land that they think is necessary for what is it necessary for? Relieving congestion or facilitating the resale of tenanted land. This land, they can acquire it through compulsory purchase. So it's significant in that. This congestion that they're talking about relates to land where its value per person fell below 30 shillings per individual. So any place where the value of land fell below 30 shillings per individual in that area was considered congested. So it's not so much to do with the number of people there, but rather the quality of the land that's there. So compulsory purchase, you might think, oh, this is a big deal. It is, but it's necessary, and the Land Commission see it as being necessary to quell, I suppose, agrarian unrest in Ireland. So alongside the other unrest within Ireland during the period from the 1919 on to 1923, there's plenty of agrarian unrest amongst landless labourers, amongst small farmers as they seek to have their farms enlarged and so on. But there is only so much land in the country. There's only so much tenanted land in the country. So the land that's rented out from the landlord to the tenant, yes, we can transfer the ownership of that. But what about the other people where land is needed? So what about the people who are landless? What about the people who are living on these congested holdings? Where is the land going to come from to address those issues? So what's looked at is the domain land, or this untenanted land. And the untenanted land, this is what it's listed out as here, the different types of untenanted land. It accounts for about 10% of all agricultural land in Ireland at the turn of the 20th century. In Cavan alone, there's about close to nearly 40,000 acres of untenanted land in Cavan in 1906. Now, the value of this land varies. Of course, these are your most valuable holdings, the domain, the home farm, the out farms, and these are somewhat less. These mountain tracts, of course, are less valuable. But this is the land that's looked at, this untenanted, and I suppose we kind of call it the domain land. And that's what the Land Commission start to look at in 1923. So this is the point where we kind of want to kind of focus in terms of what's happening under this piece of legislation at Farnham itself. So you know, Farnham is the biggest landed estate in the county. It had remained intact down until the Land Act of 1903. At that stage, they sold about 3,000 acres of land, but the rest of the estate, they still retained about 26,000 acres of land. And this, by 1923, they have about 20,000 acres of land and about 2,800 acres of untenanted land. I suppose the scale of what's happening at Farnham on this untenanted land is very much reflected in the financial accounts from the estates or the domain at that time. So the diversity of sort of economic activity there is significant. You have a farm, a dairy, a forest, a game, a stable, a house, and a garden departments. And these are all run as individual financial departments, and of course there's an extensive number of people employed there as well. So this is the type of lifestyle. This is a little photograph of Lord Farnham in 1919 with his wife and children, and I think it's his brother and the agent, a man called Blackley. So this is Travers Blackley here. And Blackley kind of comes into the story in the 1920s. Farnham has remained very, very solvent. There are little times where there's little bits of financial pressure, but it has remained solvent financially down to the 1920s. By the end of April 1922, the overall accounts of the estate are in a debit balance of over £6,000. And this is the first time probably in the history of the modern history of the estate in the 20th century that you have this sort of financial deficit there. This precarious financial situation then is heightened, of course, with local tensions. And in April 1922, Blackley's house, Travers Blackley's house at Drumbar, is attacked. And in the next week's edition of the Anglo-Celt, Lord Farnham is offering 600 acres of land for sale. So I don't know if you had been thinking about this in advance or whether this is very much a reaction to the attack on Blackley and Blackley's instant departure from Ireland at that time. Farnham was probably aware that this agrarian unrest would boil over and that there was potential for the forceful occupation of his domain lands. So he decides to sell them. He decides to sell 600 acres of them, and some of these names will be familiar to people here. Some of the townland names and the areas of lands and the names within this as well. So, but when he goes to try and sell it, as you can see here, the Anglo-Celt reported about what happened. The whole auction was fruitless and had to be abandoned. Look who arrives at the yard in Farnham on the day of the auction. You can imagine it. You know, a large number of landless men, labourers and small farmers assembled and demanded that a portion of the property should be divided amongst them. So this untenanted land, this is untenanted land here, even though there's people's names listed as occupying it and so on. These are like farms that are out on 11-month leases, so they're not subject to any of that other traditional sort of landlord-tenant relation or the stipulations that underpinned it. These are all 11-month leases, so Farnham can sell them as he wishes. So the landless men, the labourers, the small farmers assemble. They want to get it. 140 acres are £2 an acre. Now, the Farnham lands are probably the best, some of the better lands in Cavan, some of them, and it would have had a sort of a value of around £20 per acre in reality. So they were really been, really kind of insulting, saying we'll give you £2 an acre for it. None of the farms, of course, are sold. The auction's abandoned, and so on at this point in time. Farnham, of course, moves to England, and they stay in England until 1927. So they're there between probably 1922 up to 1927. And intimidations of families, boycotts, attacks, raids on their houses, looting, the destruction of country houses, as Terry Dooley has noted, around 300 country houses destroyed, were very much actions that emerged from a whole range of different reasons. Sometimes it was settling a local grievance. Sometimes it was a fear that houses might be used by the military. But as Terry Dooley has observed in his Burning the Big House book from 2022, the overwhelming motive was agrarian and land hunger. So the destruction of the house, the intimidation of the family away from the area, their departure, would, by extension in time, leave their untenanted lands available for redistribution. So Dooley writes, and I quote here, "The burning of the big houses, for whatever loose political or military reason, simultaneously ended centuries of landlord presence in an area and provided access to a sizable amount of productive agricultural land to be divided amongst locals. In essence, micro-social revolutions took place across the country." So these were micro-social revolutions because, of course, they free up the land. Farnham, as we know, survives intact. Other Cavan houses are not so fortunate, like their cousins, the Farnham's cousins at Fortland and Arley, where their homes are destroyed there. But here are the Farnhams in the Tatler magazine, so they're not just completely down there yet. They are able to take off to Hampshire. This little quote I think is incredible. This is what's written at the bottom of this. "Lord Farnham's family seat is at Farnham, County Cavan, but in the present state of affairs, when country houses are the favourite bonfire with the Shinners, he has temporarily removed himself and his family to less warlike Hampshire." So this departure, we kind of think of it as being a terrible upheaval. They don't look that terribly upset to be in Hampshire. They're still able to play tennis and be in a nice place and so on. But a few years ago, I was fortunate enough to get access to the Land Commission records relating to Farnham. And I suppose, just to give this very, very brief overview, the Land Commission formally ceases operations in 1984. It's dissolved in 1992, and it leaves behind this massive archive of materials. As these estates are being sold, each estate needs to firstly prove that they own the land. Each owner needed to prove that they had title to the land. Then there's lots of correspondence. Then there's the whole engagement about settling the land and maps and a whole range of things. But this archive is closed at the moment. It has been closed through time. As I say, a number of years ago, I was fortunate enough to get access to it through various channels, but it's closed. And Terry Dooley, again, from Maynooth, is one of the loudest voices that we hear calling for this archive to be opened. Now, it's gradually, bits of it are gradually being released at the moment. But nonetheless, it's really a significant archive. And I was fortunate enough to get hold of the stuff that related to Farnham and the acquisition file there. And that allowed me to trace through the engagement and the impact of the Land Commission on Farnham domain from their initial inspection of the lands in 1924 down to when they completed the purchase of the estate in 1930. So it's one of the first times, I think, that we have this sort of very deep sort of insight into how the Land Commission and a particular family engaged with one another. So across the period of 6 years between 1924 and 1930, the land at Farnham is being discussed between the estate solicitors, Allen and Halpin, between a little bit of input from Lord Farnham himself, and then the Land Commission itself. And it gives us this sort of great insight, because our impression of the Land Commission, I think, is always that they were very powerful, and they were very powerful. And they did have the law behind them. They did have the power to do what they wanted. but I think it also illustrates that they were prepared to modify what they wanted to do. They were prepared to negotiate with landowners. They were prepared to engage with the landowners for various reasons. And this correspondence that has survived between the Land Commission and the Farnham, I'm going to call it the Farnham estate, is also unusual in that a lot of the correspondence in the archive appears to have been culled during the emergency in the 1940s. So the survival of this is also significant for that reason. The process begins in 1924 when a letter or a report is submitted by a man called Inspector Lafferty, a P. Lafferty. This is most likely a man called Patrick Lafferty, who had been born in County Tyrone. He had been working with the Land Commission from 1906. He's pretty long established. He's experienced in 1924, because this is a very sort of a sensitive operation to step into. And Lafferty says, you know, these lands, and he's talking about lands in the untenanted townlands of Breendrum, Doredas Upper, Drumonham, Drumullen, and in Farnham itself. So these lands are required for relieving congestion, making bigger farms, and for holdings for migrants. So it's significant. They're looking at about 260 acres. He has a price set in his mind already as to what it will be. The land is well maintained. There's not going to be much need for much else with it. We get a wee bit of an insight into how Lafferty arrives at Farnham and how this report materialises in May 1924 from a newspaper report in the Anglo-Celt that is reporting on a Cumann na Gael, the county convention, the County Cavan convention of Cumann na Gael in December 1924. And the chairman of the county convention reported about how, and I quote here, "We had been asking since last February for an inspector to be sent down." Okay, so the motivation or the kind of the request for come and look at the untenanted land at Farnham comes from a political party. So there's that little bit of agitation. So he says, but when he came down, he did not look at a single piece of land except that shown him by Farnham's agents. So what's happening? Is the agent there and the solicitors, are they just showing him perhaps what they want to show him? And the few Cumann na Gael who went there were insulted by him. So nonetheless, there was then some remarks then at this meeting that there was bottles of champagne and a big dinner at Farnham as well during the inspector's visit. And remarks passed about how certain farms had been overlooked. So there was a farm that on the estate, one of these 11-month farms called the Red Shed Farm in Breendrum, that would have been a better farm than some of the other ones that had been identified. Nonetheless, this is what Lafferty plans to take over. So Farnham House itself is here, just in red, and these are the acres that he wants to take over. So a good chunk of Farnham townland itself, this townland of Drumonham, sorry, I'm probably saying that wrong, Doredas, and then down here closer to Breendrum and Drumullen and Drumlonit as well. So you can see here, this is taking away a lot of the agricultural land that Farnham has. He's left with plenty of plantations and so on. Farnham is naturally agitated by this. He comes home on Christmas 1924, looks over the lands and says, no, we want to keep, he says, I want to keep my domain intact, and I'm not prepared to sell you this piece, and I'm not prepared to sell you this lower piece of Doredas as well. And the Land Commission sort of go back and say something else to them. But all in all, this correspondence goes on. Farnham was very aware, though, that he couldn't be seen to be obstructing what the Land Commission wanted to do. So he offered other areas of land to them in lieu of Dromonum, in lieu of this big tract here and this little part here of Doradus as well. Because the solicitors wrote to the Land Commission in December 1924, Lord Farnham is anxious, if possible, to come to some amicable agreement so as to avoid friction in the locality. His Lordship's intention to reside at Farnham in the future as his family have done in the past. So he's aware. He can't say no, no, no. There has to be some sign of willing to hand over some of this untenanted land. This piece here, he's most agitated by this piece here going, because he says, how is my gamekeeper supposed to know where the shots are coming from? What sort of control am I going to have over small farmers in here? They're going to cut down my new plantations that I have here, and all of this. So it was a very practical concern that he had. The Commission ultimately abandoned their plans to acquire this piece, and between them they come to some other ideas and so on. So the main sort of things that are negotiated between Allen and Halpin and the ILC relate to how much land, what land is going to be acquired, the purchase price. They come in with their price, which roughly was calculated at around £14 an acre. Farnham said most land in the Farnham area is getting £20 per acre. They had a guy called Bomford from Kells value the land, and then the value of that land is put through as around £3,500. So between them, they kind of say, oh, we'll come to some agreement. Farnham says, okay, I'm happy to accept £3,500, even though he asks the Land Commission for more. And by February of 1926, the price is secured, £3,500 for 246 acres. The Land Commission give him the shooting rights over the lands, but there's a great delay, there's a tremendous delay in taking on these lands. So this is the lands that the Land Commission finally take over in Doradus, at Farnham, and between Drumullen and Breendrum. So he's very effective. Farnham and the agents and the solicitors are very effective in terms of keeping what he wants, keeping that intact domain, keeping the land all together. And I think it does show to us that the Land Commission were prepared to negotiate. Where you had somebody very active on the ground, where a place had survived, and where you had a domain that was still being run. The operations of the domain were not greatly impacted by that revolutionary period. Everything still kept happening at Farnham during that period. So you have a major centre of employment here in a country that's devoid of employment away from land. The land and the price and so on is agreed in 1926. 1929, the correspondence kicks up again. The Land Commission still haven't taken over the property, and Allen and Halpin are very annoyed. Lord Farnham has invested, he can't sell it on because he has sold it to them, he has to pay income tax, and then the Land Commission turn around in June of 1929 and say, yes, we'll take it next week. And then that only agitates them further, because how is he going to get rid of his cattle in the middle of the season and all of this sort of thing. So anyway, between the jigs and the reels, the estate is this land is finally taken over by the Land Commission in January 1930. And this is the land, this is how the land is divided up. And this is the little report from the Anglo-Celt in February of 1930 that tells us of what's happened. Initially, I thought that delay in taking on the land was just or we have it now, there's no big rush. But there actually turns out to be a reason why they were delaying the kind of redistribution of the land like this. The policy was that the Land Commission wanted to deal with the tenanted holdings on the estate first of all. They wanted to make sure that the tenanted holdings on the estate at Farnham and at other estates were viable before moving this land on to other people. So they didn't want to sort of say, okay, yeah, we do all the landlord to tenant transfers and then realise we've got lots of unviable farms, and we've given away the untenanted land that we wanted to, that we could have used. So they waited until the tenanted section of the estate was dealt with, and then moved to deal with this untenanted land. And this is what happens. I've just anonymised names here, so these are the names of the people who get the land, and I've created this from the Government Gazette and from the valuation records. So you have about 13 new holdings. 10 of them are enlarging farms, because even in Cavan, we had congested farms in Cavan, or congested areas in Cavan, and we have 3 new farms or new holdings created there as well. And what you have, I suppose, is this sense of existing farmers in the locality getting additional land that will make their farm more viable. These 2 individuals here, they come from other parts of Cavan. And in this instance here, this family come from Killashandra area, and their holding, or their farm in Killashandra at this point in time, was comprised of 9 different separate fields or parcels of land. So the Land Commission were also sorting things out in that area, and they said, if we could gather up those 9 fragmented pieces of land, we could actually, in that area, create more viable farms. So we'll approach this family and we'll say to them, we'll give you the same area of land at Farnham in a consolidated block if you're prepared to give that up. So this movement of people, while we think of those migrations of people in the 1930s and the 1940s, and the movement from the west to the east, with the Land Commission being so important, there is movement as well to allow the work of the Land Commission to happen in the 1920s. So by moving from Killashandra to Farnham, this particular family leave in the Killashandra area where they've left these 9 parcels of land that can then be reallocated to the neighbouring farmers there. So it's pretty important. I'll just talk about one of these examples here in Breen Drum. So TT and TB, these are the family initials. These guys who received the lands in Breen Drum, their main farms were in Dromard, so in a nearby townland of Dromard. RT, who gets the 33 acres in Doradas, had 6 acres in Derraheen as well. So that's how you're kind of getting that sense of getting to a sort of a magic number. The Land Commission in the 1920s had in their mind a sense of around 20 acres of what they called reasonable land as being a good, viable farm. And then, of course, that acreage increases over time. This is how you can see these. You can see this whole transfer of land in these cancelled books. So these are the valuation records in the Tulcha Éireann in the valuation office. And this is what happens. This is how this transfer of land is recorded. And you can see there the names of the new tenants coming in here, and the size of the farms that they're getting, and a description of them as well, and the year is marked in there as well. So you get that in the example for Bellamont at Cootehill. You can see the Smith name being stroked through, and the names of the new tenants and their farms coming through there. Despite the loss of land at Farnham, the Farnhams remain big, significant landowners. They returned there in 1927. For the next 30 years, as you know, they farm it very intensively until the death of Arthur Kenlis Maxwell. And as I say, they have a big estate, still a big estate there, even after the sale to the Land Commission. And again, Dooley has observed this about the interaction between the Land Commission and the landlords. The government, he says, was prepared to balance the loss of employment against acquisition. So the government had in their mind, yes, we could acquire all the agricultural land here and make maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 new farms. But what of all the families who are working in this area, in this domain at the moment? What are they going to do? So the government were very carefully thinking, these are places like Farnham, where the family are still there, the house is there, everything's working, were very important centres of employment. And this kind of picture from 1930 captures the scale of that. And even though there's a selling off of land during the 1950s and maybe again in the 1980s from the Farnham estate, you still end up with a very intact tract of land when the land is still finally sold in 2001. And this is down very much to that negotiating and engagement between Farnham, Allen and Halpin and the Land Commission. So just in conclusion, what happens? Between 1923 and 1965, there are another 105,000 acres of land that's sold across Cavan. The Farnham estate is one of the biggest. So this is the tenanted estate. This is where you have the farms. At Kingscourt, the Pratts sell out the other Fortland estate as well. And around 15,500 acres of this untenanted land is acquired as well down to 1970. At Ashfield at Nearcoot Hill, the Clements family there sold to a family called Fletchers from Killashandra, who were sawmillers. The Fletchers took what they wanted from the land, i.e. the timber, and then sold that back onto the Land Commission at that stage. And then the Land Commission, there's some really lovely examples of those very traditional Land Commission houses from the 1960s over at Ashfield. Nonetheless, even down to 1979, sorry, that is awful, you can't even see that, but you're going to have to believe me that that's a little extract from a magazine called Irish Business from October 1979, when they ran a series of who owned Ireland at this stage. And when you throw your eye down through that list, you essentially see the remnants of the landed families. So Lord Farnham is there, the Vesey Stoneys at Bobsgrove, the Coles at Drumcrow, the Mortimers at Mulla, the Mees at Clover Hill, the Kilnacrot Abbey Trust, the Missionary Sisters at Killashandra. Let me see who else is there. The Pattons at Red Hills. They had sold to. They had bought White Venables estate at that stage as well. So just in conclusion, just very, very quickly in conclusion, thank you for listening. This is this protracted revolution. As I said, there are various reasons why some landlords decide not to sell. They don't have to sell. They don't want to lose this status that they have. Others sell because they have perhaps no connection with the county. They just have this commodity that's in the county and decide to get rid of it. Others find themselves with tenants that can't buy or are unwilling to purchase, and I think that's kind of interesting as well. That unwillingness of some tenants to purchase. But the Farnham case study itself, I think, reveals some interesting things about the Land Commission archive, and hopefully that archive will become open to allow us to look at more examples of this, to see were the Farnham people unique, or were the Land Commission open to engage in at a similar level with other families as well. It really reveals them as a body that are pragmatic. They understand when they start to feel negotiations happening. They're aware of balancing local circumstances and the landowner's interests. So they're aware that Farnham is going to provide lots of employment. These big farms are also rearing lots of cattle, which is a key sort of a demand of the government in the 1930s, the 1920s, 1930s as well. And I suppose being able to access the Land Commission files, we get that sense of illustrating this process. It's not just maybe as heavy-handed from the Land Commission as you might have expected. Their engagement, and of course the richness of that correspondence as well. I didn't bother reading out to you reams of things, but the correspondence between the Land Commission and the Farnham people is very rich and insightful as well. But just to say that just because the Land Commission isn't open, it doesn't mean that we don't have other ways of understanding this period in the 1920s as well. We can use these valuation office records to see that happening very clearly. We can look at Irishifigul, we can look at those return of advances, we can see the revolution happening in other ways as well. And even through the newspapers as well. We sometimes think of this as being something hidden, but obviously, people were obviously desperately interested in knowing who was getting land. So the Anglo-Celt had their little report, and they said, next week we'll tell you, so if you want to go and find out who those people are who get the land, it's written in the Anglo-Celt. They report on it, and the names are listed out the following week. So you can get to grips with it in that way as well. So listen, Jonathan, thanks so much for the invite, and thanks everybody for your patience and attention. It's very good of you for being here. Okay, thank you.